I spend a lot of time in the backcountry, from hiking and camping to running and mountaineering. Over 90% of my trips are solo. Here's how I stay safe when I'm all alone. Now, a lot of these tips can be applied to group trips or solo trips, but I think there are a few key takeaways that you should definitely be aware of if you're planning on heading out solo. Also, I apologize for the cicadas in the background. It's that time of year here in New Zealand, and they're just non-stop as soon as the sun rises and once it's set. So that background noise is just all day. Solo hiking can be great. You don't have to rely on anybody else to be available for when you want to go on a trip. And you also don't have to set your expectations to what someone else wants the trip to be like. You can go as far or as short as you want. It can be as difficult or as easy as you want. You can camp somewhere where someone else might not want to. Or you can have a longer break or keep hiking. Being out solo on your hiking trips means you can have more flexibility and not worry about what other people want to do. If you're thinking that you want to try and go hiking by yourself, then I'd start small. Plan some shorter, easier trips, do some day hikes, or if it's an overnight trip, then try plan one that you've done before and that you know the terrain. Knowing your limits is really important when you're out solo hiking. Yes, it can be really fun to push yourself and try new things, but if you're not careful, you could end up in a dangerous situation. Building up confidence in a group first can be a great way to learn what your strengths and weaknesses are. If you're feeling up to it and you're feeling adventurous, you can just dive head on and jump straight into a solo trip. But it does come with a bit more risk involved. You're going to want to be aware of that and know that this trip might be harder than if you were with a group. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're with a group, you're typically a lot louder than if you're by yourself. This can be especially handy when you're in an area where there are predators like bears. Making noise as you're going along the trail can be a great way to avoid suddenly startling one. Bear this in mind, no pun intended, when you're on your next solo trip and you're in an area where there are bears or other large animals. Make a bit more noise, clap your hands, or yell out every now and again. Hopefully you won't get any sudden surprises. So this doesn't just apply to people going out by themselves, it also applies to group trips as well. But carrying something like a PLB or a Garmin InReach or some sort of satellite communication device is a great option for staying safe when you're out in the backcountry. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Garmin Mini InReach. I'm still using the InReach Mini 1, but they've got a new version of this. They've got the Mini 2, and then they also have the messenger devices as well. So there's a few different options for satellite communication. Some mobile phones are even getting the technology to be able to communicate via satellite as well. I don't quite think you should rely fully on your phone for satellite communication just yet, just because the technology is still a little bit new and might not be as reliable as a dedicated satellite messaging device. But a PLB is also a really good option. Some people prefer a PLB over a messaging device like this, and that's because the PLB has one purpose, and that's to send out an alert when you are injured or need rescuing in the backcountry. I like the InReach Mini because not only can I send out an SOS if I am stuck or injured or need rescuing, but I can also communicate with friends and family during my trip to let them know how I'm doing, where I'm at, what's happening, if I'm going to be a little bit late, so that they don't have to worry. It is nice to know that, especially on bigger trips, my family's not sitting there waiting to see if I make it out after however many days, but they get frequent updates to let them know that I'm still alive. So yeah, I am a big fan of a satellite messaging device like the InReach Mini. When we're heading out solo into the backcountry, I'd highly recommend telling someone your trip intentions before you head off. You're going to want to give them an idea of where you're starting from, where you're finishing, what time you plan on finishing, and the stops along the way that you're planning on taking, where you're planning on camping for the night, any sort of information that might be helpful for people looking for you if you don't make it out on time, or if you send out some sort of distress signal. Here in New Zealand, we're lucky enough to have a large network of huts, mostly maintained by DOC, or the Department of Conservation, but also by a few other groups as well. If you visit a dock hut in the backcountry here in New Zealand, you'll find that there's some sort of intentions book. And that's basically a book that allows you to write down your name, the date you're coming in, the date you're leaving, how many nights you're staying, what your trip intentions are, and what the weather's like, and any other comments you might have. Now, these intention books are a really good way for DOC to get a rough idea of how many people are visiting their huts each year, but they're also a very handy resource for search and rescue. If you've left your intentions with someone, like I touched on earlier, then search and rescue is going to have a rough idea of where you're heading, and they might be able to go to some of these huts that might be along your route and see if you've filled out the logbooks. And that gives them an idea of where you're at on your trip and where you might be and what might have happened. The intention books are a really good resource for search and rescue when they're out looking for someone who's injured. If you are in New Zealand and you are visiting some of our lovely backcountry huts, then I would definitely recommend you fill out the logbook while you're there. It's also a cool way to say I was here. Planning your trip. Now, this is a big one, and it's something that I'm guilty of not doing to maybe the extent that I should for some of my trips. There have been a number of trips where I plan it very last minute and just head out, rush out, pack things, throw things in a bag, and rush out on my trip. And that's due to poor planning to begin with and a bit of spontaneity as well. But it does mean I might end up forgetting things, not being quite aware of the weather conditions or the track conditions, or not really knowing quite where I'm going either. So it's definitely something I'm guilty of, and although it hasn't landed me in any serious trouble, there have been a few trips and nights out that maybe could have been avoided if I had planned a bit more. So when you're planning your trip, things you're gonna wanna know is the environment you're heading into. So what sort of terrain are you going into? Are you going into more bush or more alpine terrain? Is there going to be snow? Is there going to be mud? Are there going to be river crossings? Knowing the environment you're heading into is a great first step in planning your trip. You should have an idea of where you're going, probably in the form of what sort of track you might be hiking along, or the location you're trying to get to. Those are important things to know, and from there you're going to want to look at the difficulty of that track, how long it is, how much time it's going to take you, and what sort of hazards or obstacles you might encounter while you're out hiking. Probably one of the biggest things to be aware of when you're out hiking solo is that you don't have anyone else to rely on. You can't rely on anyone else for anything you've forgotten or any decisions that might need to be made throughout the trip. You have to rely on your own judgment and intuition when you're out hiking by yourself. That's why it's really important to plan your trips and know what you're getting yourself into, because you're not going to have anyone else to rely on. Knowing that it's going to be only you making the decisions is something to bear in mind. When you're out hiking, it's very easy to become dehydrated, tired, or hungry, and those things can all affect your decision-making process. When we're fatigued, we're not going to be thinking as clearly as if we had a lot of energy, and that can lead to poor decisions being made, which can put you in a worse situation. You don't have anyone else to fall back on. You can't trust someone else to make the decisions for you or tell you that's a bad idea. So when you're out solo in the backcountry, think carefully about your decisions, make sure you stay hydrated and well fed, and all that planning you put into your trip prior to leaving will pay off. When you're hiking with other people, you can save weight by sharing gear amongst yourselves. Someone can carry the tents, someone else can carry the cooker, you can divide the food amongst yourselves, so your pack might actually end up being lighter than when you're out solo. Because of this, when you're out solo hiking, you might be tempted to cut some corners. You might not be willing to pack that suitable shelter that you would bring on a group trip, causing you to leave it at home. Now, a lot of people do this in New Zealand. They plan their hiking trip and they know they're going to be staying at a backcountry hut. Our backcountry huts are a great resource, and they do provide a very comfortable means of shelter when you're outside. But a lot of things can go wrong when you're out hiking. You might be slower than you realize, you might injure yourself, or you might get lost while you're out. And all that can lead to you not making it to the hut in time, or you might never make it to the hut at all. This is why carrying some sort of emergency shelter is a very good idea. Even carrying some sort of small tarp or a bivy bag or something that will provide you with protection from the elements is a great idea to always put in your pack. Sure, we can always plan to try end up at a hut on our trip, But everything doesn't always go to plan, which is why I would really recommend carrying some sort of emergency shelter, especially when you're out on your solo trips, because you don't have anyone else to rely on to have a shelter with them. Similarly, when you're out with other people, it can be very easy to just trust that someone else has that piece of gear. Oh, someone else has the lighter, someone else has the gas, someone else has the first aid kit. Carrying a first aid kit is an essential when you're out in the backcountry, even if it's just a very basic one with some plasters and some ibuprofen, maybe some repair tape or a bandage. You're definitely going to want to have those means of fixing yourself if you get injured when you're out solo. Yes, it can be great to rely on others for everything, but when you're out solo, you definitely have to pay more attention to what you're bringing and what you're packing. This can apply to groups as well, but you're definitely going to want to make sure you have enough food for your trip when you're out solo. I'd even recommend bringing a bit extra than you think you'll need, because if you're delayed while you're out, you're definitely going to be thankful for those extra few bars you decide to throw in your pack. If you're out on a group trip, your other companions might have some extra food that they're able to share if it turns out that you didn't bring enough or your trip's taking longer than expected. But when you're out solo, the only person you can rely on is yourself. You can't get an Uber Eats delivery when you're in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone reception. So pack that little bit of extra food. You might just find you need it. Weather is a big factor when it comes to outdoor adventures, whether that's in a group or in a solo setting. When you're solo, it's a good idea to pay closer attention to what the weather's going to be doing on your trip, because although it's only going to be affecting you, you're going to have to make all the decisions around it. If you're in an area where there are predators, be aware that it's going to be a lot scarier to deal with that by yourself. Luckily, here in New Zealand, there's not really any predators. But for example, in Canada, where there are things like bears or mountain lions, you're going to want to take the extra precaution, carry something like bear spray so that you know that you can defend yourself. And yeah, just be aware, it's a lot scarier when you're all by yourself. So be prepared for that. Making sure you have the appropriate clothing and equipment for your trip is an essential, especially when you're going out by yourself. You're not going to be able to rely on others to get by. The level of difficulty and technicality of the trip will determine what kind of gear is necessary. And even if you should be doing it solo. If it's a very difficult or technical trip, especially in alpine conditions, you'd be better off considering going with someone else rather than alone. But that's up to you to determine the risk factor and how much risk you're willing to take. So that's all the tips I've got for you guys for staying safe when you're out solo hiking. I think the biggest key takeaways: starting small, knowing your limits, understanding that there's extra risk involved when you're out by yourself. Do your research thoroughly and know what you're getting yourself into. Let someone know your plans. Carry an emergency SOS device. And have fun. We go outdoors to enjoy it and escape our everyday lives. Remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. If you're not having fun or it's a bit too much, then just go home. There's absolutely no shame in doing so. If you want to know what I think the best way to improve your hiking is, then check out this video here. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.